My name is Margaret Turner. I'm 62 years old, and I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to evict family. I thought kindness, patience, and love could patch any crack in a relationship. I was wrong. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, stood in my kitchen, arms folded, wearing that impatient smirk she often had when she thought I was being old-fashioned. I had just asked her to sweep the living room because my back had been aching all morning. She rolled her eyes, and not in a small, playful way. No, this was the full dramatic role. The kind teenagers use when they want to say you're useless without saying you're useless. Then she shoved the broom into my hands. Here, you can do it yourself, she said flatly. I froze. For a moment, I didn't even feel like I was in my own home. Something in me cracked right there. The years of biting my tongue, of letting her little jab slide, of ignoring her disrespect because I wanted peace for my son and grandkids, they all came rushing back in one hot wave. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the broom. I just stared at her and smiled. The next morning, she found a crisp white envelope on the kitchen counter with her name on it. Inside was an eviction notice. The look on her face when she read it. Well, you'll have to imagine that part for now. Because before we get to the day I handed her that paper, you need to understand why that single act, one little eye roll, was the final straw that broke me. Let me take you back. It started 3 years ago when my son, Daniel, came to me with a desperate voice over the phone. Mom, Rachel and I were in a tough spot. We might lose the apartment. Can we stay with you for a while? Just until we get back on our feet. I didn't even hesitate. Of course I said yes. That's what family is for, right? My house felt too quiet since my husband, Richard, passed away. I thought maybe having them here would bring life back into these walls. And truthfully, I couldn't wait to have my grandkids, Emma and Jack, under my roof more often. The first week was fine. Rachel was polite enough, if a little distant. She cooked dinner once or twice, cleaned up after the kids, and thanked me for letting them stay. But little things started to creep in. She would make comments about my furniture being outdated, or laugh when I told her I still wrote checks to pay bills. I brushed it off. Younger people just see the world differently, I told myself. But by the second month, the balance in my own home had shifted. I would come into my kitchen and find Rachel scrolling on her phone while dishes piled up in the sink. I'd ask her to keep an eye on the kids while I ran errands, and she'd sigh like I'd just asked her to clean the whole neighborhood. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe living here was harder on her pride than she let on. One night, I overheard her on the phone in the guest room, my guest room, which I had cleared out for them. She was talking to a friend. I don't know if she forgot I was home or just didn't care, but I heard her say, Margaret's nice and all, but she's stuck in the past. She's just in the way. That hurt. More than I expected it to. I thought about my own mother, how she taught me that kindness meant turning the other cheek. So I did just that. I swallowed it and kept on making her coffee in the mornings. But over time, the slights became sharper. She started rearranging my kitchen cabinets without asking, telling me her way made more sense. She dismissed my suggestions about the kids with, "Don't worry, I've got it handled," in that tone that meant I should worry. And Daniel, he didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to see it. Then came the day Rachel came home with shopping bags, smiling like a cat who caught the canary. I thought maybe she'd found work. Instead, she told me she'd signed up for a business opportunity selling overpriced cosmetics. "I'm going to make us so much money," she said. But weeks went by, and the only thing she made was a mess of my dining table with boxes and flyers. One afternoon, I found my grandson, Jack, coloring on my living room wall. Rachel was sitting right there, scrolling through her phone. When I asked her to help me clean it up, she laughed and said, "Oh, relax, they're just walls. You can repaint when we move out." That should have been the moment I spoke up. But I didn't. I kept telling myself, just a little longer, they'll get their own place, and things will go back to normal. I wanted so badly to believe that. It was a Sunday when my body finally told me it had had enough. I'd been on my feet all morning cooking breakfast, cleaning up, and doing laundry for 5 people. My back felt like it had a hot iron pressed against it. I sat down in the living room for just a minute of rest. Rachel walked in, saw the crumbs on the floor from the kids' toast, and said, "Margaret, the place looks messy." I smiled weakly and asked if she could sweep for me. Just that one small thing. She rolled her eyes, shoved the broom into my hands, and walked away. Something inside me turned cold in that moment. I wasn't just tired. I was done. And the very next morning, well, you already know about the envelope on the counter. But what you don't know yet is what happened right after she opened it. And trust me, that part is where the storm really began. Rachel's fingers trembled slightly as she held the eviction notice, but her face was something else entirely. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She smirked, that same smug, dismissive smirk I'd seen too many times in my own kitchen. Daniel came into the room, still groggy, his hair sticking up in every direction. "What's going on?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Rachel turned toward him like she was the star of some courtroom drama. "Your mother's evicting us," she said, her voice dripping with fake shock. "Can you believe this? After everything I've done to help around here." I stayed calm. My coffee cup was warm in my hand, the steam curling upward like a quiet shield between us. "Daniel," I said evenly, "we'll talk in the living room." He glanced between us, confusion wrinkling his brow. "Mom, what is this? Why would you?" "It's all right," I interrupted softly, but my eyes didn't leave Rachel. "We'll talk." She made a point of slamming the envelope down on the table before walking off, muttering under her breath. I couldn't catch every word, but I was pretty sure ungrateful was in there somewhere. Daniel and I sat in the living room. I explained slowly, calmly, that this arrangement wasn't working, that I'd been patient, I'd been respectful, but I couldn't live in my own house like a guest anymore. He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I didn't realize things were so bad." I gave him a long look. "Didn't you? Or did you just not want to see it?" He looked away. That told me everything. We didn't argue. We didn't even raise our voices. But the air between us felt heavy, like wet laundry hanging on a line. Rachel avoided me for the rest of the day. She took the kids out to the park, stayed gone until dinner, and didn't say a single word to me when they came home. Fine by me. I didn't need a performance, I needed peace. For a few hours that evening, I actually had it. The kids were laughing in their room. The TV was playing an old black and white movie, and I was knitting on the couch. I almost let myself believe the transition would be smooth. But nothing about Rachel was ever smooth. The next morning, I went into the kitchen and found her on the phone again. She was talking louder than usual, almost like she wanted me to hear. "Yeah, can you believe it? Kicking out her own grandchildren. Heartless, right?" She laughed. Some people just like control too much. I didn't say anything. Not then. I just poured my coffee and went back to my knitting. My mother used to say, "A snake will show its fangs without you poking it." Rachel was showing hers just fine. By midweek, Daniel had told me they'd start looking for a place. It gave me some relief, but it also worried me. I knew Rachel would make this move as dramatic as possible, and if there's one thing that can shake a family to its core, it's bitterness mixed with pride. I tried to focus on small things. I baked cookies for Emma's school fundraiser. I pruned my rose bushes. I even went to church on Wednesday night, and the choir sang my favorite hymn. For a moment, I felt like myself again. But peace never stayed long when Rachel was around. On Friday evening, Daniel came home alone from work. He stood in the doorway looking uneasy. "Mom, Rachel's at her sister's tonight with the kids. She told me to tell you she doesn't want you talking to her directly anymore. If you need something, tell me." I set down my book. "This is my home. I'll talk to who I please." "I know," he said quickly. I'm trying to keep the peace until we move." The peace. Always about keeping the peace. No one ever seemed to notice I was the one who'd been holding it together for months, while Rachel chipped away at it. I didn't argue further. But deep down, I knew that her avoiding me wasn't going to last. People like Rachel don't fade quietly. They explode. Sure enough, the next day was the explosion. It was Saturday morning, and I'd just finished making pancakes for the kids when Rachel walked in. She didn't say good morning. She didn't even look at the food. She went straight for the cabinets, banging them open and closed, muttering under her breath. I asked, "Is something wrong?" She turned on me, eyes blazing. Yeah, something's wrong. I can't find the good skillet. The one I bought. Did you move it? I told her calmly that I'd put it in the dishwasher last night. Oh, of course, she snapped. God forbid I touch your precious kitchen without permission. Everything in this house is about you, isn't it, Margaret? I was stunned for a second, not by her words, but by how quickly her voice had risen. You've been gunning for me since we moved in, she continued. Every little thing I do, you have a problem with. And now you're kicking us out just to get your quiet little world back. Well, guess what? I'm not going to let you make me the villain here. The room was silent except for the faint sizzle of pancakes on the griddle. I wanted to shout back. I wanted to list every time I'd bitten my tongue, every time I'd chosen kindness over confrontation. But I didn't. I just looked at her and said, "This isn't about making you the villain, Rachel. This is about me not being the fool anymore." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. And then, without another glance at me, she stormed out of the kitchen and slammed the door so hard that one of my framed pictures rattled off the wall. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, and realized the storm had only just begun. Because later that afternoon, I discovered something that made the eviction notice look like a polite invitation, and it was going to change everything about how I handled her from that moment forward. The house was quiet after Rachel's door slam. Too quiet. I stood in my kitchen with a plate of pancakes going cold, wondering if I should toss them to the birds outside. My hand still trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the force it took to keep my temper locked down. I'd lived long enough to know that letting anger drive your words could burn a bridge you might someday wish you hadn't. But this bridge? I was starting to believe it wasn't worth saving. After I'd finished cleaning the kitchen, I decided to take the laundry out of the dryer. The laundry room in my house is small, just enough space for the washer, dryer, and an old wooden shelf where I keep extra towels and cleaning supplies. As I folded the clothes, something caught my eye, a plastic grocery bag tucked behind the detergent bottle. It wasn't mine. I pulled it out, curious. Inside was a stack of unopened mail. My mail. At first, I thought maybe it was an accident. Maybe Rachel grabbed it from the mailbox and forgot to give it to me. But as I shuffled through the envelopes, I saw postmarks going back over a month. Bills, letters from my insurance company, even a small padded envelope from my friend Carol in Florida, which I'd been wondering about. All of it hidden away. My heart pounded. Rachel had been taking my mail. Why? I opened the padded envelope from Carol first. Inside was a small silver bracelet and a note in her curly handwriting. Saw this at a craft fair and thought of you. Hope you're well. Miss our phone calls. I swallowed hard. If I hadn't found this bag, I wouldn't have even known she'd sent it. The bills worried me more. A late fee notice for the electric company. A warning from my credit card provider about a payment they hadn't received. I knew I'd been paying my bills on time, but these letters told a different story. And then, buried in the bottom of the bag, was the worst one, a letter from the county property tax office. I read it twice to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding. According to this notice, my last property tax payment hadn't gone through. If it wasn't resolved within 30 days, they could place a lien on my home. My home. I sat down right there on the laundry room floor. The hum of the dryer filled the silence. I thought about all the days I'd been running myself ragged in this house, cooking for everyone, cleaning, caring for my grandkids, and all the while, Rachel had been tucking my life into a plastic bag and hiding it behind a bottle of Tide. Was this revenge? Punishment for the eviction notice? Or had it been going on longer? Back when she still pretended to be polite. I wanted to storm into her room right then, demand an explanation. But she wasn't home. And maybe that was a blessing, because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to be careful. If she was willing to do this, what else might she do if cornered? So instead, I quietly gathered every piece of mail from that bag and took it into my bedroom. I locked the door, sat on my bed, and started sorting. It took me nearly an hour to go through it all. I made a stack of bills to pay immediately. I wrote down dates and amounts. I even took pictures of the envelopes just in case I needed proof later. By the time I was done, I'd made up my mind. Rachel wasn't just disrespectful, she was dangerous to my stability. This wasn't going to be a quiet move out. This was going to be a battle. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange haze. I baked a pie for Emma because she'd asked for one earlier in the week, and I tried to smile when she came into the kitchen, her little hands covered in glitter from an art project. I told her she could lick the mixing spoon, and she grinned like it was Christmas morning. Those moments, those were my anchor. The kids had nothing to do with their mother's spite. They were innocent, and I wasn't going to let this turn me cold toward them. By the time Rachel came home that evening, I decided not to say a word about the mail. Not yet. I wanted her to think I didn't know. She breezed into the kitchen with the kids, all fake sweetness. "Smells good in here," she said, eyeing the pie. "It's for Emma," I said simply. She pursed her lips, maybe expecting me to offer her some. I didn't. The next day, Sunday, was almost peaceful. We went to church separately. Rachel had plans, and I spent the afternoon in my garden, pulling weeds and trimming back the lavender bushes. My neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, came over to chat, and we talked about everything from the weather to her cat's strange new habit of stealing socks from the laundry basket. It felt good to laugh. But that evening, as I was making tea, I overheard Rachel on the phone again. This time, she was in the hallway, speaking low but urgent. "I don't care," she hissed. "We'll be out of here before she knows what's missing. Just make sure you can move it fast, okay? I'm not leaving it behind." My stomach dropped. What it? She hung up quickly when she noticed me in the doorway. Her eyes darted to the kitchen counter, then back to me. "What?" she said, forcing a laugh. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer. My mind was racing. Was she planning to take something from my house before they moved out? That night I barely slept. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind against the window made me sit up and listen. The next morning, Monday, I got up early. I decided to start making an inventory of my most valuable things: the antique clock from my grandmother, the silver tea set Richard's parents gave us, even the old quilt my mother had stitched by hand. I wrote down where everything was and took photos. I wasn't going to accuse her without proof, but I wasn't going to be caught off guard either. By midday, Daniel came home early from work. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked. We sat in the living room, and he rubbed his forehead like the conversation pained him. "Rachel says she feels unwelcome here. She thinks you're being cold to her on purpose." I wanted to laugh. The idea that I was the problem was almost comical. But I kept my voice calm. "Daniel, I have tried to keep this house peaceful. But there are things you don't know. Things I haven't told you, because I didn't want to put you in the middle." He frowned. "Like what?" I opened my mouth, and then I stopped. If I told him about the mail now, he'd go straight to Rachel, and she'd know I was on to her. I needed to keep that card close. "Just trust me when I say this arrangement can't continue," I said. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. He just sighed and said they were looking at an apartment on Thursday. I thought maybe that meant the last of the tension was behind us. I thought maybe we could make it through the next couple of weeks without another blow-up. I was wrong, because that very evening, as I was coming out of my bedroom, I caught Rachel in the hallway, with the attic door open, a step stool in place, and my grandmother's antique clock in her hands. And she froze when she saw me. There she was, Rachel, standing in the hallway, hands wrapped around my grandmother's antique clock, like it was just some knickknack she'd picked up from a yard sale. For a second, neither of us spoke. I don't even think either of us breathed. My eyes locked on the clock, the dark mahogany wood glowing faintly in the hallway light, the gold trim catching every flicker. I remembered polishing that clock with my grandmother when I was 10, her telling me it would be mine to keep the family ticking. And now it was in her hands. "What are you doing with that?" I asked, my voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Rachel blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Oh, this? I was just cleaning it. Thought it'd look nicer in the living room." The lie was so thin I could see daylight through it. I stepped closer, holding out my hands. "Give it to me." Her grip tightened slightly and something flashed in her eyes. Not guilt, not embarrassment, but defiance. "It's dusty, Margaret. I'm just trying to help." My heart was thudding hard, but my voice stayed even. "That clock has been in my family for 3 generations. You don't move it. You don't touch it. Now hand it over." For a moment, I thought she might refuse. She glanced toward the attic, as if she'd been planning to hide it there, then back at me. Finally, she shoved it into my hands a little too forcefully and stepped back. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "But you don't have to bite my head off. I was trying to make this place less old." I almost laughed. Less old? This was my home, not some rental property she could redecorate on a whim. I turned without another word and carried the clock back to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me and set it gently on the dresser, running my fingers over the cool wood. My grandmother's voice seemed to echo in my head, reminding me that some things are worth protecting at all costs. I stayed in there for a while, not because I was afraid of Rachel, but because I needed to collect myself. The more I thought about it, the more I realized if I hadn't come down that hallway at that exact moment, that clock might have been gone for good. After about an hour, I came out. The house was quieter than usual. Rachel was in the kitchen, pretending to scroll on her phone, but I could feel her eyes on me as I passed. I ignored her and went out to the garden. Out there, the late afternoon sun was warm, and the scent of lavender mixed with freshly cut grass. It was almost enough to calm me down. I pulled weeds, trimmed a few rose stems, and tried to let the rhythm of the work steady my thoughts. For the next couple of days, I avoided her as much as possible. Daniel and the kids were my buffer. When they were home, she kept up her sweet act. But when it was just the two of us, her silence was heavier than any words. On Wednesday, Emma came into my room with a crayon drawing of a house. "It's our house, Grandma," she said proudly. She'd drawn me in front of it, wearing my wide-brimmed garden hat. I knelt down and hugged her. That little picture reminded me exactly why I was putting up with all this until their move-out date. Because no matter how bitter her mother was, my grandkids deserved to remember me as a safe place. But peace didn't last long. Thursday afternoon, Daniel told me they'd found an apartment and would be moving in 2 weeks. That should have been good news. Relief even. But Rachel's reaction told me those 2 weeks weren't going to be easy. I overheard her in the kitchen later that evening, telling someone on the phone, "Yeah, 2 more weeks. She's not going to know what hit her." Those words lodged themselves in my mind like a splinter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the clock, about the mail I'd found, about the way she looked at me like I was the intruder. I decided it was time to start locking more than just my bedroom door. I went through the house, checking the locks on my cabinets, securing the attic, and making sure anything sentimental or valuable was either in my room or hidden where she'd never think to look. For a couple of days after that, things were oddly calm. Too calm. Rachel kept her distance, even smiled at me a couple of times. It was unsettling, like the eye of a storm. You just know something's coming. And I was right. It was Saturday morning when I went to get my purse from the hallway table. The strap was twisted, and I noticed it felt lighter than usual. My stomach tightened. I unzipped it. My wallet was still there, but the envelope with $300 cash I'd set aside for an upcoming church fundraiser was gone. I froze, staring into the empty pocket. I knew I hadn't spent it. I knew exactly where I'd put it. And there was only one other adult in the house besides me. Rachel. I gripped the edge of the table, taking a slow breath. If I confronted her without proof, she'd twist it around like she always did, make Daniel believe I was imagining things. But if I let this slide, she'd take it as an invitation to try again. That's when an idea began to form, a way to catch her in the act. I didn't say a word about the missing money. Not yet. Instead, I decided to set a trap. The clock was still ticking behind us as Rachel and I walked toward the kitchen. That sound followed me like a shadow, steady, stubborn, as if reminding me that time itself was watching. Rachel tried to break the air with small talk. "So, how's the garden, Grandma? Still growing those big roses?" I wanted to answer, but my words got caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. My mind wasn't in the garden, it was still in that hallway, staring at her hands on that clock, wondering why she had touched it like it belonged to her. "It's fine," I said flatly, pulling open the cupboard for the tea tin. "But the roses, they've been quieter this year." Rachel gave me a puzzled look, but she didn't ask. She knew I spoke in layers sometimes. What I meant was, nothing in this house had bloomed the same way since my Charles died. She set the kettle on the stove and kept her eyes down. That was her tell. When she didn't want to look at me, it meant something was on her mind. And that something usually had teeth. The kitchen felt smaller than usual, like the walls had leaned in a little. My fingers tapped the counter while the water heated. I was thinking about the letter I'd found a week ago, tucked behind the sugar jar. A letter addressed to me but unsigned, its words scrawled in a hand I didn't recognize. You don't know everything about your family. At the time, I'd crumpled it up and told myself it was just some cruel trick. But now seeing Rachel act so strange, touching Charles's clock without asking, I wasn't so sure. When the kettle whistled, Rachel poured the water, handed me my cup, and smiled in that careful way that people do when they're hiding something. Do you still wind it? She asked suddenly. The clock. My fingers tightened around my teacup. Every Sunday, just like Charles did. She nodded, but it wasn't a normal nod. It was the kind that says I'm confirming something I already suspected. And right there, I realized I wasn't just uneasy. I was afraid. Rachel stayed for another hour, but our conversation never left safe ground. Recipes, weather, the neighbor's new dog. Yet underneath it all, there was a low hum of unspoken words, like we were both walking on a frozen pond, careful not to crack it. When she finally left, I stood in the hallway again, staring at the clock. The pendulum swung left, then right, in a rhythm that felt almost mocking. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard something strange. Not the creak of old wood or the sigh of the wind, but the clock striking 3 times. It wasn't 3 o'clock. I sat up, my pulse quickening. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about an old timepiece. This was about the letter, about Rachel, about something buried in this family that was finally clawing its way to the surface. And I decided I wasn't going to wait for it to come to me. Tomorrow, I'd start digging. I woke before the sun, not because of any rooster, but because my mind wouldn't rest. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking of that clock in Rachel's hands, the odd look in her eyes, and the way she had frozen when she saw me. That wasn't just surprise, it was fear. And fear meant there was something worth hiding. I slipped out of bed as quietly as a shadow. Years of living alone had made me an expert at moving silently. My niece complained, but I ignored them. Today wasn't for weakness. Today was for answers. The first step in any trap is patience. I couldn't just accuse Rachel without proof. She was slippery enough to wriggle out of anything if I did. No, I needed her to walk right into my hands. I started with the study. The drawers were as I'd left them, but I could see faint scuff marks on the desk's corner, fresh ones. I traced them with my fingertips. Someone had leaned here, searching. I opened the middle drawer, the one I kept locked. The key still sat in my apron pocket where it belonged, yet the drawer didn't feel right. The stack of old letters wasn't as neat as I remembered. Someone had touched them. That's when I decided to move the real valuables. The gold brooch, the silver cufflinks from my late husband, and, most importantly, the documents. The will, the land deed, and a few things I'd rather not name just yet. I placed them in a biscuit tin from the 1960s, faded roses painted on the lid, the kind no one would bother opening unless they were after cookies. Then I tucked the tin inside the flour bin in the pantry, deep under the sack. No one looking for valuables would go digging there, unless they were very desperate or very clever. The second part of my plan was more theatrical. I picked one piece, a gold locket with a hairline crack, and left it in the unlocked desk drawer. Bait. If Rachel had sticky fingers, she'd see that locket and think she'd found something I'd forgotten to hide. Now I just needed to make sure she couldn't resist it. When Rachel came down for breakfast, I was already at the stove. I kept my voice sweet, just like any grandmother greeting her kin. Morning, dear. I found something in the desk you might like to see later. Old family piece. Not worth much, but it has a bit of history. Her spoon paused mid-stir in her coffee. Just for a second. Then she smiled too quickly. Oh, I'd love to see it. I didn't show it to her then. Instead, I forgot to lock the study when I went to tend the garden. I made sure to leave the hallway quiet and the floor clear. No creaks, no distractions. From the kitchen window, I had the perfect view of the study door. I pretended to fuss over the tomato plants, but my eyes never left that hallway. It took 15 minutes. Rachel walked past, pretending to head upstairs. Then she stopped, looked around, slipped into the study. My hands tightened around the garden shears. The trap had sprung. I gave her 5 minutes, enough rope to hang herself with, then walked back inside as quietly as a cat on the hunt. When I reached the study door, I could hear the faint rustle of paper. I pushed the door open. Rachel spun around, the locket dangling from her fingers. Her face went pale, then flushed. "Oh, I was just looking for cookies?" I asked, my voice colder than the grave. She blinked, caught. Her mouth opened, closed. It was just lying here, and I thought. "That's the thing about touching what isn't yours," I said softly, stepping into the room. "It always leaves fingerprints." She dropped the locket into the drawer and backed away like a child caught with her hand in the jar. I wasn't going to take it. I didn't smile. "Of course not. But tell me, Rachel, what were you looking for before you found it?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the desk's other drawers. That was all I needed to see. I didn't press her, not yet. A trap works best when the prey thinks they've escaped it. So I smiled, patted her arm, and said, "Well, never mind. Best go wash up for lunch." She left quickly, and I stood there, staring at the empty space where her eyes had wandered. Tomorrow, I'd set the next bait. Something bigger. Something she couldn't walk away from. This was no longer about a missing clock or an old locket. This was about the truth, and I was going to drag it into the light, one careful step at a time. I had learned long ago that the best traps are not the kind you see in cartoons, with springs and snapping jaws. The best traps in life are built out of silence, patience, and the quiet confidence that sooner or later, the guilty will hand you the rope to hang them with. By now, the house itself seemed to have joined me in my little campaign. The creak in the hallway outside my bedroom had grown more pronounced these last few nights, as though the floorboards wanted to warn me of footsteps approaching. The grandfather clock in the living room ticked with a slightly sharper note, marking each moment of my plan like a metronome guiding a slow, deliberate symphony. Rachel didn't suspect a thing. She still moved about with that air of careful helpfulness, making tea in the mornings, offering to fetch my knitting needles, and keeping her voice warm enough to pass for genuine concern. But there was a subtle difference now. Her eyes flicked a little too quickly over certain corners of the room, and her hands lingered just a moment longer than necessary when she touched my things. The first step of my trap was simple. I gave her room to make a mistake. On Monday morning, I left my bedroom door half open and made a show of rummaging through my dresser in full view. I pulled out my late husband's gold pocket watch, one of my most treasured possessions, and placed it on the edge of the dresser, right near the door. Then I sighed loudly, muttering just enough for her to overhear. I really must remember to put that away before something happens to it. It was bait, of course, but not the final one. You don't catch a clever fox with just a piece of meat. You lead it down the path where the trap is waiting. I spent the rest of the morning in the garden, trimming the rose bushes and pretending not to notice that she found some excuse to pass my bedroom twice. Both times, her step slowed just a fraction when she reached the door. The second step was observation. I had pulled the old baby monitor out of the attic, a relic from when my granddaughter Lily was just a little bundle of curls and mischief. The thing was bulky, but still worked well enough to pick up the softest sounds. I set the receiver on my nightstand and tucked the transmitter behind a stack of books on my dresser, angled so the tiny microphone faced the watch. By Tuesday evening, the tension in the air had thickened. I could feel it every time she brought me tea, every time she accidentally drifted into my room to dust or straighten a picture frame. My own nerves hummed with it. There's a particular thrill to watching someone walk right into a snare you've built, like watching a spider wait for the fly to tangle itself deeper with every flutter. Wednesday morning, I made the next move. Over breakfast, I told her I had an appointment with Dr. Patterson that afternoon and would be out for at least 2 hours. That wasn't entirely true. The appointment was me sitting in the corner booth of Millie's Cafe, sipping coffee and waiting for the clock to bring me home at exactly the right moment. Before leaving, I placed the gold watch back on the dresser in the exact same spot, this time leaving the bedroom door wide open. I patted Rachel's arm and said, Don't fuss too much while I'm gone, dear. Just relax. Her smile was perfectly polite. Too perfect. I walked to the cafe with a steady pace, but my thoughts were anything but calm. My mind ran through the plan like a rehearsed play. By the time my cup was empty, my hands itched to turn the page and see the next scene. I left the cafe at precisely 3:15, walking home with a quiet urgency, the way a hunter returns to check the snare after the first snowfall. When I stepped into the house, the first thing I noticed was the faint, unsettled stillness. It's the kind of stillness that comes after movement, like a pond after you've tossed a stone into it. Rachel was in the kitchen, drying her hands, and she greeted me with that same warm tone. I nodded, climbed the stairs, and stepped into my bedroom. The watch was gone. I stood there for a moment, letting the air settle around me. I didn't call her name, didn't accuse. Instead, I went straight to the nightstand and flicked on the baby monitor receiver. The faint hum of the speaker filled the room, followed by the sound of soft footsteps. Then came the metallic scrape of the dresser drawer and the unmistakable jingle of the watch's chain. Her voice followed, low, almost a whisper, just for now, just for now. That was enough. I tucked the receiver into my cardigan pocket and went back downstairs, my face calm, my voice light. Rachel. Dear, would you mind helping me with something in the sitting room? She followed me in, wiping her hands on her apron. I turned, holding the receiver so she could see it, my thumb resting on the play button. I pressed it, and the small room filled with the sound of her own voice. Her face drained of color. I think, I said, in the soft, measured tone I used to use with my students when they've been caught cheating. You've got something of mine. Something that doesn't belong to you. She stammered, tried to spin some story about moving it for safekeeping, but the words tangled in her mouth. Guilt is a clumsy liar. It trips over its own feet. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. Instead, I told her to fetch it and place it on the table. She did, her hands trembling. I picked it up, slipped it into my pocket, and simply said, "You need to leave." For a moment, she looked like she might argue. Then she saw something in my eyes, maybe the steel that comes from surviving a lifetime of storms, and she nodded. She left that same afternoon, taking nothing but the bag she came with. The house exhaled when she was gone. I sat in my chair by the window, the gold watch warm in my palm, the ticking of the grandfather clock filling the room. My trap had sprung and the fox was gone. But as the evening light crept across the floorboards, I couldn't shake the thought. Sometimes catching someone isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's only the beginning. I've lived long enough to know that truth doesn't knock politely. It barges in like an uninvited guest, muddy boots and all, turning your life upside down before you can blink. That morning, I woke with a strange mix of dread and excitement buzzing under my skin. Something told me that today, my patience would either pay off or get me killed. I made my coffee slower than usual, staring out at the fog curling low over the garden. Every trap I'd set was still in place. The twine snare hidden by the shed, the tripwire by the chicken coop, the little wind chime of nails I hung near the back gate, so silently that even a rat wouldn't hear until it was too late. They weren't meant to catch anyone. No, they were meant to tell me who was bold or stupid enough to wander into my world. And last night, I'd heard one of them sing. Not the full chime, just the single, faint tink, like someone had brushed against it and froze. That tiny sound had kept me awake for hours, my mind stitching together every odd thing that had happened in the last few weeks. The missing feed bags, the half-buried footprints in the vegetable patch, the smell, yes, the smell of cheap cologne, carried on the winsome nights. Today, I would follow the trail until it ended. I didn't make my usual rounds right away. Instead, I waited, watching from the kitchen window with my knitting in my lap. The morning sun burned away the fog, revealing the familiar lines of my yard. The grass still bent where someone had passed. There was movement by the tree-line, subtle, just a shadow against the shade. That was all I needed. I slipped my feet into my old boots, the leather cracked but quiet, and grabbed my walking stick. Not because I needed it, but because people underestimate a woman with a cane. And sometimes, a heavy oak stick is more than just a walking aid. I kept low as I moved along the side of the house, avoiding the crunchy gravel path. Every few steps, I paused, listening. My heartbeat slowed into the rhythm I'd learned from my father when we hunted rabbits in the hills. Step, breathe, wait. Step, breathe, wait. When I reached the coop, I crouched and inspected the ground. The tripwire was still taut, but the soil bore a fresh indentation, a heel mark. Too small to be a man's, too big for a child. My mouth went dry. Whoever they were, they'd been here more than once. The print was layered over older, faint impressions. I followed them, weaving through the grass until I reached the shed. My twine snare was triggered, not broken, triggered. Someone had stepped inside, brushed the mechanism, and reset it. That meant they weren't just snooping, they were studying me. Something shifted inside my chest. This wasn't just about curiosity or theft. This was deliberate. I pushed the shed door open, letting it creak loud enough to announce me. The air inside was stale with the smell of earth and rust. My tools were in place, except for one. The spade I kept hanging on the far wall was leaning against the workbench, a smear of fresh mud clinging to the blade. And then I saw it. A scrap of fabric caught on a nail just below the window. Dark blue, frayed at the edge, and reeking faintly of that same cheap cologne. My fingers tightened around my stick. This was it. The thread I could pull to unravel the whole mess. I stepped back outside, eyes sweeping the trillion again. That's when I noticed the crow. It sat perched on a low branch, head cocked, staring not at me, but at the ground beneath the trees. A black, glossy sentinel. The crow cawed once, sharp and urgent, before taking off. And as it did, I saw the figure, half hidden behind the thick trunk of an oak, crouched low. The same dark blue fabric, a glint of metal in their hand. They realized I'd seen them. Everything went quiet in my head, like the world took one long breath. Then I moved. I didn't run. Running would have made noise. I walked fast and steady toward the trillion, my stick tapping the ground in an almost lazy rhythm. But my grip was white-knuckled. The figure bolted. I followed, ignoring the ache in my knees, weaving through the underbrush until I caught sight of a small clearing I'd never paid much attention to before. And there, half buried in the soil, was the truth. A shallow pit covered in leaves. Inside, burlap sacks, my missing feed bags stuffed not with grain, but with things that didn't belong on my land. A rusted hunting rifle, a box of unmarked tins, rope, a lantern, and on top, a folded map of the entire town with certain houses circled in red. One of them was mine. My stomach turned cold. I bent to pick up the map, and that's when I heard the click. A sound you never forget once you've heard it. The sound of a gun being cocked. Step away, a voice said. Low, male, close enough that I could hear his breathing. Slowly, I straightened, the map still in my hand. My mind raced through every possible move I could make. Scream? No one would hear me out here. Run. I'd never make it. So I did what any grandmother worth her salt would do. I played dumb. I was just admiring your little hiding spot, I said, turning my head just enough to catch a glimpse of him. Mid-30s, lean, eyes darting like a cornered animal. You've been busy. His jaw tightened. Drop it. I let the map fall to the dirt, but not before my fingers tore a tiny corner from the edge, just enough to keep in my pocket later. What do you want with me? I asked, keeping my voice calm, curious even. He didn't answer right away, just motioned with the gun toward the woods. Walk. And so I did, my boots crunching over twigs, my mind calculating every step. If this was the end of the trail, I'd make damn sure I went out swinging. The rain hadn't stopped since dusk, and I took it as a blessing. Rain covers footsteps, muffles movement, and drowns out sounds that might betray a plan. By 8 p.m., my traps were set. Every one of them. The tripwire in the hallway. The broken floorboard replaced with a sheet of thin plywood that wouldn't hold a man's weight. The fishing line strung at ankle height across the back porch steps. The bait, a dim lamp in the living room, and my silhouette in the rocking chair was the most important part. I wasn't sitting there, of course. I'd set up an old coat and scarf to mimic my figure. The real me was tucked away in the dark corner by the kitchen, my back to the wall, my shotgun laid across my knees. My heart wasn't racing, not yet. That would come later. Right now, my mind was cold, steady. The phone line was still dead. I'd checked an hour ago. That meant I was still on my own. A branch snapped somewhere outside. Faint, but not faint enough. They were here. The window on the far side of the house creaked. My body went still, every muscle listening. A long pause. Then the sound of careful fingers sliding up the wooden frame. A man testing if it was locked. I almost smiled. That window's lock was broken, a deliberate choice. I wanted them to think they'd found their entry. There was a pause, then a soft grunt, and the window slid open. Cold air seeped in. I kept still. Rain drummed harder on the tin roof. A shape eased through the gap, dropping silently onto the living room carpet. My decoy's shadow swayed slightly in the rocking chair light, and the figure's head tilted toward it. I could feel his eyes studying me. He took a step forward. That was when the tripwire caught him. It wasn't enough to injure. I didn't want it to end that easily. But it did make him stumble forward hard enough to catch his weight on the plywood panel. The crack was sharp and satisfying. His leg went through the floor with a dull thud, and he swore under his breath, struggling to free himself. I stepped forward from the kitchen, shotgun raised. "Don't move," I said, my voice low and calm. His head jerked toward me, eyes wide in the dim light. He froze, half kneeling, one leg trapped in the hole. "Grandma," he breathed, like the word itself was a question. I said, "Don't move." I walked closer, my boots silent on the rug. My fingers stayed loose on the trigger, but I didn't take my eyes off him. The mask he wore was nothing but a cheap black cloth, but it didn't hide the gleam in his eyes. Eyes I recognized. "You've been coming around here for weeks," I said, leaving things, watching, thinking I wouldn't notice. He didn't answer. His silence told me more than words would. I nudged the fishing line near the porch with my foot, a small signal. And right on cue, the back door creaked. The second one. This was the real danger. The first man was bait, or a distraction. The second was the one I'd been hunting for. He came in fast, expecting to catch me at the decoy chair. But when he saw me with the gun on his partner, he hesitated just a second. That was all I needed. The rug beneath him wasn't just a rug. It covered a scattering of marbles and nails. His boot slipped, his foot twisted, and he crashed to the floor with a grunt. I swung the gun between them. "Both of you," hands where I can see them. The first man started to pull his leg free, and I took a sharp step closer, pressing the barrel into his shoulder. "Leave it," I said. For a moment, it worked. Two intruders, both down, both unarmed, at least visibly. But there's something you learn with age. When things seem too easy, they usually are. The second man's hand was inching toward his jacket pocket. I shifted my aim to him just as he froze, eyes cold and calculating. "You're not going to shoot," he said quietly. "You're too smart for that." I tilted my head. "You'd be surprised what I'm willing to do." A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the rain. Finally, I made my move. I backed toward the kitchen phone, still keeping them in sight, and grabbed the old flare gun from the counter. "I'm giving you one chance," I said. "You walk out that door and you don't come back." The first man scoffed. "You think this ends here? You don't even know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I said. "And I know exactly where to find you." That got him quiet. I stepped forward, tossing the flare gun toward the second man's chest. He caught it by reflex, and the moment his hands were busy, I swung the shotgun but into the first man's jaw. He crumpled sideways with a muffled groan. The second man went for his pocket, but I was already moving, slamming the kitchen door shut and sliding the heavy bolt. "See you soon, boys," I said, voice calm. "And next time I won't be so polite." I slipped out the side door into the rain, circling wide through the darkness. My truck was parked a quarter-mile down the dirt road, hidden behind a stand of pines. By the time I got to it, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the rush. I'd won tonight. They were still in the house, furious and humiliated. And that was exactly where I wanted them. But as I pulled onto the empty road, headlights slicing through the rain, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. A third car, parked at the far bend. No lights, no movement. Just waiting. Whoever was inside didn't follow me. They didn't need to. They just wanted me to know they were there. The game wasn't over. Not even close. You'd think, after everything I'd been through in my long life, that one more victory would be enough to make me sleep like a baby. But that night, sleep never came. I sat in my old rocker by the window, the one facing the garden, staring at the moonlight draped across the yard like a thin silver shawl. The quiet was deceptive, too perfect, too neat. It was the kind of silence that settles before a storm tears everything apart. The last 48 hours had been a whirlwind. My trap had worked, at least for now. I'd turned the tables, driven them back, and even made sure a few of their secrets would stay buried where they belonged. The neighbors were suddenly friendlier. The whispers in town shifted from "poor Margaret, losing her mind" to "did you hear what she did? She's tougher than she looks." They didn't know the half of it, but I did. And I knew enough to understand that in games like this, victories are never permanent. They lick their wounds in the dark, plan in the shadows, and wait for your guard to drop. I was sweeping the kitchen that morning when the first crack in the calm appeared. A letter. No stamp. No address. Just a single, folded sheet pushed under my door while I'd been upstairs. My gut twisted before I even picked it up. The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged, like someone was in a hurry. "You think this is over? It's not. Watch your garden. Watch your windows. And whatever you do, don't go near the well." No signature. I stood there, the broom dangling from my hand, staring at the paper as if it would explain itself. The well. That damned old stone well at the edge of my property. I hadn't thought about it in years. No one in their right mind went near it. It was half collapsed and dangerous. But the mention of it wasn't random. That was the thing about these people. They never wasted words. If they told you not to do something, it was because they wanted you to do it, or because there was something they didn't want you to see. My first instinct was to march right down there, but I stopped myself. No, this was what they wanted. I'd learned that much. Instead, I spent the day as if nothing had happened. Made bread, watered my roses, chatted with Mrs. Doyle over the fence. But my eyes kept drifting toward that corner of the property, toward the crooked line of trees where the old well sat in shadow. That night, I didn't turn on the porch light. I sat in the dark, watching. At exactly 1:13 a.m., a figure moved through the trees. Slow, careful. They knelt beside the well. I couldn't make out their face, but I saw them lower something down with a rope. Heard a faint splash. Then they left as quietly as they'd come. My hands tightened around the arms of my chair. This wasn't over. No, it was only just beginning. The next morning, I walked the property like it was any other day. But I took a different route, looping wide, as if I had no interest in the well. I could feel eyes on me, though I couldn't see anyone. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't stand it any longer. I waited until the wind picked up, enough to mask my footsteps, and made my way down the slope. The air grew colder the closer I got, heavy with that damp, earthy smell. The stones of the well were slick with moss, the rope still tied to a rusted metal ring. I leaned over, peering into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but my own reflection rippling in the water. Then, just for a moment, I thought I saw something else. A pale shape, moving. I jerked back, my pulse pounding. No, it couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks on me. Had to be. But deep down, I knew better. That's the thing about winning a battle. You get a taste of control, but the enemy learns from their mistakes. They come back smarter, sharper, and more desperate. I straightened up, brushing the dirt from my hands, and walked back to the house without looking over my shoulder, because whoever or whatever was watching me didn't need to see my fear. That night, as I locked the doors and checked the windows twice, I whispered to myself. This was only round one, and I knew round two was already on its way. You ever hear silence so thick it hums? That's what my house felt like after that night. No barking from Rusty. No creak of the windmill out back. Just that heavy, waiting quiet, like the land itself was holding its breath. I just won a small battle, but you don't survive as long as I have without knowing. Small battles make the enemy meaner. I sat at my kitchen table at dawn, black coffee in hand, watching the first light crawl over the frost-tipped fields. The bruises on my arms were blooming purple from the scuffle in the barn the day before. But bruises fade. Fear lingers. My victory had been simple, too simple. The sheriff had finally taken an interest after I handed him proof. That flash drive with the recordings, the pictures, the ledger of stolen goods. But the way he held it, like it was a dead snake, told me all I needed to know. They weren't done, and they weren't far. That morning, I walked my property in a slow, deliberate circle. Old habits. You don't just live in the country. You tend it like a living thing. I checked my traps, the ones I'd set in the trelline where I suspected they'd been sneaking through. 2 were sprung. No raccoon, no fox, just the faint trace of boot tread in the mud. The smart kind of tread where the heel digs in and then twists out, masking the direction of travel. Someone knew I'd be checking. Someone wanted me to know they were checking, too. The rest of the day passed in fits. I pretended to do chores. I hung laundry I didn't need to wash. I took Rusty on a walk he didn't need. But really I was listening. The crunch of gravel, the shift of wind, the way the birds would go silent and then start up again in a flurry. By late afternoon, I heard the hum of an engine down the road. It wasn't the mail truck. Too deep, too throaty. Rusty's hackles rose before mine did. I didn't wait to see who it was. I slid inside, locked the front door, and went to the parlor window. A black pickup rolled by slow enough for me to see the driver's arm resting on the open window, thick, scarred, with a tattoo I recognized from years back. A wolf's head, inked in jagged lines. Lucas Kane. I hadn't seen him since the trouble in '93, but I remembered his eyes. Pale as dishwater. He didn't stop, didn't wave, just kept on driving, but his mirror angled toward the house like he was marking it in his mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house pressed me upright in bed. By midnight, I was fully dressed and sitting by the kitchen door with the lights out, shotgun across my lap. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, that faint crunch of leaves just outside the side porch. Not a deer, not a stray dog. This was slower, intentional. I eased up, moved to the side window, and peered through the gap in the curtains. A figure in dark clothes stood just beyond the porch steps, not moving, just watching. I raised the shotgun, heart pounding hard enough I could feel it in my throat. But when I blinked, they were gone. No sound of running, no rustle of leaves. Just that terrible emptiness again. I waited until sunrise before I unlocked the door. Out on the steps was a single item. A coin, old, worn, with an engraving I knew too well. The same wolf's head tattoo Lucas Kane had on his arm. A message. We're here. I thought about calling the sheriff, but then I remembered the way he'd avoided my eyes yesterday. No, this was mine to handle. I decided to flip the script. Instead of waiting to be hunted, I'd become the hunter. I took inventory, knives, old bear traps, tripwire, 2 working flashlights, and the big Winchester that had been in my family for 3 generations. I cleaned them all, checked ammo, oiled the parts. Then I packed a small bag with water, jerky, and extra shells. If they wanted me cornered, they were about to find out I don't make good prey. By the 3rd night, I set out on my own. I knew the trails behind my land better than anyone. The dips in the earth where water pooled after rain, the old deer blind, hidden in the pines, the ridge that overlooked the only road in. That's where I found it. A fresh fire pit, still warm, nearby tire tracks, and hanging from a low branch, something that made my stomach twist, a length of rope tied in a noose. Not big enough for a person, big enough for Rusty. That was their mistake. They just told me how far they were willing to go, and I'd already decided I was willing to go further. Back at home, I put my plan into motion. I reinforced the cellar door with an iron bar. I laid a false floor over the trapdoor in the pantry that led to the root cellar, in case I needed to disappear quick. I moved all my valuables, not just money, but the old family documents they'd never think to steal, into a steel box buried near the back fence. Then I waited. 3 days later, it came. A knock at the front door. Slow, measured. Not the frantic kind of a neighbor in trouble, the kind meant to unnerve you. I opened it with the shotgun hidden behind the frame. Lucas Kane stood there, grinning like a fox at a chicken coop. "Evening, Margaret," he drawled. "We need to talk." I didn't invite him in. "We've got nothing to discuss." His grin didn't falter. "Oh, I think we do. You've been meddling, sticking your nose in business that's older and meaner than you." I let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence does more damage than words. Finally, his grin slipped. "You hand over what you got, all of it. And maybe we let you keep your piece out here." "Maybe." I tilted my head. "You've been around here long enough to know. Lucas, no one tells me what I can keep." That's when he saw the shotgun. And for just a second, his eyes narrowed like a snake about to strike. But he didn't. He stepped back, raised his hands, and chuckled low. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, old lady. But all right, we'll play it your way." He walked off down the porch steps, but not before leaning close enough for me to smell the tobacco on his breath. "This land," he murmured, "won't be yours much longer." And then he was gone. I locked the door, slid the bolt, and stood there in the dim light, listening to the ticking of the clock. I just stared the wolf in the eyes, and I knew it wouldn't be the last time. Some victories are just pauses in the fight. And this one was only the beginning of something much darker heading my way. I could feel it in my bones. The real storm hadn't even started yet. The storm had passed, but the air in my house still felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Outside, the clouds had rolled away, leaving the night sharp and clear. The moonlight cut long silver lines across the floorboards of my living room, and every creak sounded louder than it should have. After what I'd been through, any sane woman would have locked the doors, pulled the blankets over her head, and tried to sleep. But I wasn't any woman. I was Margaret Harris, 74 years old, arthritic knees, and a stubborn streak thick enough to choke a mule. Sleep could wait. There were things I still didn't understand, and the longer I sat still, the more my thoughts scratched at me like a cat wanting out. The signs had been there for weeks. Whispers when the wind wasn't moving. Shadows where they didn't belong. The sensation that the walls themselves were listening. The police had laughed it off, called me paranoid. My son had told me to stop watching too many mystery shows. Well, I was watching, all right. Just not the kind he meant. I lit the kettle, more for the sound than the tea. That soft hiss filled the silence, and I leaned against the counter, thinking about everything I'd pieced together. Whoever was behind this hadn't just stumbled into my life. They had been watching me, learning my patterns, maybe even listening from inside the house. That thought dug into me. Inside the house. I glanced toward the far wall, the one that backed onto the old storage room I barely used. It had always felt colder in there. I'd blamed the draft, but tonight I wasn't so sure. I poured the tea, but my hands didn't stop trembling until I set the cup down. Then I went to the drawer and pulled out the flashlight I kept for power cuts. My heart was steady now. Too steady. It was the kind of stillness I felt before catching a fox in my chicken coop. The storage room door groaned when I opened it. Dust smoke spun in the air, lit by the flashlight's beam. My late husband's fishing rods leaned against one corner, still smelling faintly of salt and bait. Boxes lined the wall, full of Christmas ornaments, old photographs, and things I hadn't touched in decades. I crouched and began tapping along the far wall with the handle of the flashlight. Hollow. Solid. Hollow again. The hair on my neck prickled. I pressed my ear to the paneling. Nothing. But then, faint, almost too soft to notice, there it was. A scrape. Like something being dragged slowly across wood. From the other side. I straightened up so fast my back popped. My breath fogged in the beam of the flashlight. There wasn't supposed to be another side. When we bought this house, that wall had been the boundary. Beyond it was supposed to be the exterior siding. But if that sound was coming from inside, then someone had made space where there shouldn't be any. I backed out of the room and closed the door softly. My mind was racing. This wasn't just mischief. This was planned, calculated. Someone had been in my walls, maybe still was. I decided then, and there I wasn't calling the police. They'd just laugh again, and laughter wouldn't save me if whoever was in there decided to come out. No, this was my house, my territory. I boiled another kettle, this time not for tea, but for an old trick my father had taught me. While the water heated, I fetched a small mirror from the bathroom and a broom handle from the hall closet. I poured a cup of boiling water, held the mirror close to it, and let the steam fog its surface. Then I pressed that mirror flat against the cold storage room wall. A faint pattern bloomed in the fog. A hairline crack, running along a perfect rectangle. A hidden door. I stepped back, heart thudding. I'd been right. I didn't open it. Not yet. That would be reckless. Instead, I placed an old sewing pin at the base of the doorframe, just so I'd know if someone moved it. The rest of the night, I sat in my armchair with my flashlight and my old revolver, the one my late husband had kept locked away. Every creak of the house made my finger twitch, but nothing came through that wall. By morning, the pin was gone. Not fallen gone. That was when I knew. I wasn't alone in my home. And worse, whoever was in there knew I'd found them. You ever hear the sound of a mousetrap snapping shut? That sharp little crack that comes when the bait's been taken and the hunter's patient wait is rewarded? Well, that's the sound I'd been waiting for all week. Only this time, the mouse was a living, breathing, dangerous man, and my trap wasn't made of spring-loaded metal. It was made of quiet suspicion, careful planning, and a whole lot of patience. I'd spent days setting the stage. I didn't rush. Oh no, rushing is for fools and hotheads. A proper hunter knows you have to let your prey get comfortable. You want them thinking they're safe, secure, so they make mistakes. Ever since I caught that glimpse of the boot print in my back garden, the one that didn't belong to me, didn't belong to any of my visitors, I'd been setting my mind to the problem. By daylight, I played the harmless old lady, smiling at the postman, nodding politely to Mrs. Keller as she walked her yapping terrier, even chatting with young Thomas at the grocery when he offered to carry my bags. All the while, I kept my ears open and my eyes sharper than a butcher's knife. But at night, I moved differently. I studied the layout of my property with new eyes. Where were the shadows deepest? Where did the ground stay damp enough to take a footprint? Which spots could I observe without being seen? I marked them in my mind like a general planning a battlefield. And then I set my bait. I didn't go for anything fancy. Fancy gets you caught. No, I picked something ordinary. A little battered tin box I kept on a shelf, the kind you'd mistake for a box of buttons or sewing needles. Inside, though, I placed something a certain sort of man would risk himself to take. 3 old gold sovereigns, just polished enough to catch the moonlight if the box was opened. But here's the thing, those coins weren't just bait. That box was dusted inside and out with the finest layer of powder, barely visible to the eye, but enough to cling to skin and clothing. Not flour, not talcum, something else. Something I'd make sure could be seen under the right light. The trap wasn't just about catching a thief. It was about proving the thief. By the 5th night, my patience paid off. It was just past midnight when I heard it, the faint scrape of the back gate. I'd oiled the hinges myself so it would open without a sound to anyone else. But I knew that metals whisper as well as I know my own breath. I was already in position, crouched in the dark upstairs, watching through the little gap between the curtains. The figure that stepped into my garden moved like a man who knew where he was going. No hesitation, no wandering. He kept low, eyes scanning, until he reached the patch by my shed where the shadows pooled deepest. My heartbeat didn't race, oh no. I trained myself to keep it steady, but my hands tightened slightly on the camera. Yes, a camera. Digital. Silent. I'd set it to take shots without a flash. Each press of my finger was a stitch in the net I was weaving. He went for the shelf. Right to it. That confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. He'd been in my house before. Or someone had told him exactly where to look. His fingers closed around the tin box, and he opened it right there in the dark. I couldn't see his expression, but the small pause in his movement told me he'd seen the coins. That's when I knew. I had him. I stayed still until he left, slipping out the same way he came. My hands didn't shake as I put the camera down. My breathing stayed slow. But inside, I felt the kind of grim satisfaction a hawk must feel as its talons close around its prey. In the morning, I carried on as though nothing had happened. I baked scones. I waved to Mrs. Keller. I even hummed a little tune while watering the flowers. The key to keeping control of a trap is to make sure the mouse doesn't even know it's caught until you decide to close the cage. I waited until the afternoon before I took my evidence to the one person I thought might actually listen, Detective Harris. Young but not foolish. He had the kind of eyes that told me he'd seen enough of the world to know evil when it stared back at him. He looked at the photos, then at me. Mrs. Margaret, do you know who this is? I nodded slowly. I've got a name. I just needed proof. Now I've got both. He leaned back in his chair. This changes things. I could see him thinking. I could see the weight of it settling on his shoulders. And I could see the flicker of worry, because if I was right, this wasn't just about a garden thief. This was tied to something bigger. Before I left, he said quietly, be careful. If you're right, they won't take kindly to being exposed. I gave him a thin smile. I've been careful all my life, Detective. That's why I'm still here. But that night, as I locked my doors and drew my curtains tight, I couldn't help but feel the shift in the air. The trap had sprung, yes, but a cornered animal is more dangerous than a hunting one. And something told me the man in my garden wasn't acting alone. No, he was just the first thread in a much larger web. And now that I'd pulled at it, I could almost feel the spider turning its gaze toward me. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the real danger was just beginning. The night had that strange stillness I've come to fear. You know the kind. When the wind stops whispering in the trees, the crickets go silent, and even the old boards of the porch hold their breath. My bones ached in a way that told me trouble was walking toward my door, quiet but certain. I had been keeping watch for weeks now, eyes sharp, ears sharper, waiting for whatever was lurking in the shadows to make its move. The traps I'd set, clever little things that only a woman who'd lived as long as I could devise, had been holding steady, catching nothing but the occasional unlucky squirrel or nosy raccoon. But tonight felt different. Tonight, it wasn't just the silence. It was the weight in the air, pressing down on me like a wet blanket. I sat in my rocker, the one facing the kitchen window, holding my cup of chamomile tea like it was a talisman. The lamplight painted my hands gold, but outside the glass, the dark was deep and heavy. My eyes kept flicking toward the tree line at the far end of the yard. Something was out there. It had been nearly a month since I uncovered the truth. The ugly, dangerous truth about who had been behind the strange goings-on in our little town. The disappearances, the vandalism, the whispers in the night. My neighbors thought I was just being nosy, but no, it was something much bigger, much older. And I wasn't ready to tell them yet, not until I could prove it without a shadow of a doubt. But my problem was this. Once you start pulling on a thread, you can't always control what unravels. I'd poked the beast, and the beast had noticed. Around midnight, the first sign came. It wasn't loud, just a faint creak from the far side of the barn. Most people would have ignored it. Not me. I've learned that danger never comes knocking like a polite guest. It slips in, quiet as a breath, hoping you won't notice. I set down my tea, grabbed the old flashlight from the counter, and checked the revolver tucked in the drawer. The thing is older than my youngest grandchild, but it still fires true. I didn't want to use it, but I wasn't about to be caught empty-handed. The grass was cold under my bare feet as I crossed the yard. The moon was high, casting just enough light to turn the barn into a hulking shadow. My traps were lined up across the entrance, tripwires hidden under leaves, a plank balanced with nails ready to drop if triggered. I stepped around them with care. The creak came again, this time closer. Come on out, I called softly. My voice carried in the stillness. No use hiding. I know you're there. For a moment, nothing. Then a rustle in the hay. I lifted the flashlight and caught the glint of eyes. Not animal eyes. Human. Narrowed. Watching me. Step forward, I ordered. My hand stayed steady, even though my heart was drumming against my ribs. The figure moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if mocking me. A man, tall and thin, his face half covered by a scarf. But I recognized him anyway. Caleb Fletcher. Of all the snakes in this county, he was the last one I expected to crawl into my barn. I'd known his family for years, folks who smiled to your face and stole from your garden the moment your back was turned. He'd been in trouble before, petty theft mostly, but I'd always figured he didn't have the guts for anything worse. Clearly, I'd underestimated him. "Evenin', Miss Margaret," he drawled, voice slick as oil. "Didn't mean to startle you." "Then you shouldn't have been creeping in my barn past midnight," I said, not lowering the flashlight. He gave a half smile that didn't touch his eyes. "I was just looking for something I lost." And would that something happen to be the box you and your friends took from the Henderson place?" His expression didn't change, but his body tensed. "You've been asking too many questions," he said finally. "Folks around here don't like it when you stick your nose where it don't belong." I stepped closer, my voice dropping low. "And I don't like it when snakes slither into my yard. So I suggest you turn around and leave before I decide to test my aim." He didn't flinch, just stood there, sizing me up. And then he did something that chilled me to the bone. He smiled. "You think I'm the worst thing coming for you, Margaret," he said, almost gently. "But you don't have a clue." With that, he backed away, melting into the shadows before I could take another step. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the revolver beside me, thinking about Caleb's words. Not the worst thing coming for you. That could mean anything. Or anyone. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. Whatever he was hinting at, I wasn't going to wait for it to come to me. I was going to find it first. I spent the morning combing through the notes I'd been keeping. Names, dates, places. A whole web of connections that pointed to something much bigger than a few small-town thieves. There were out-of-towners involved. Money changing hands in the dead of night. And something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. By noon, I had my plan. I'd follow the trail Caleb had just confirmed, not in the open, but quietly, the way old women know how. People forget we're dangerous when we stop talking and start listening. I knew one thing for certain. I'd gotten my first real warning. And if history's taught me anything, it's that the first warning is never the last. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. I checked and rechecked my traps, adding a few more near the back fence where the woods pressed close to the yard. I oiled the hinges on the barn door so it wouldn't creak, and I fixed a loose board on the porch that had been giving me away. When evening came, the sky turned the color of bruised peaches, and the wind picked up just enough to make the trees sigh. I lit a single lamp and sat in my rocker again, the revolver in my lap. Somewhere out there, I knew Caleb was watching me. And somewhere beyond him, something worse was coming. I could feel it. The town was too quiet that night. The kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace, but prickles at the back of your neck. Rain clouds smothered the moonlight, casting everything in a deep, uneasy shadow. From my window, I could see only the faint, flickering bulb in the barn. My barn. The one I swore I locked hours ago. I knew they were back. After all the battles, the confrontations, the careful traps, and the unmaskings, I'd learned one thing. Evil never really packs up and leaves. It retreats. It hides. And when it thinks you've gone soft, it slithers back in. But they had underestimated an old woman who's lived through wars, lost more than she's kept, and learned to smell danger the way others smell bread baking. I had one final move to play. I didn't bother with the lantern this time. The dark was my friend. Every step across the creaking floorboards of my farmhouse was deliberate, slow, calculated. Outside, the cold night air bit at my cheeks, but my hands were steady. I'd left a little something in that barn, a surprise that would make tonight their last visit. As I reached the barn door, I could hear them inside. Whispers, movement, the sound of something being shifted, dragged, maybe stolen. They were confident, too confident, like jackals thinking the lion had gone to sleep. I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The faint bulb swung lazily from its cord, making shadows lurch across the walls. They froze when they saw me. "Evenin'," I said softly, my voice carrying in the still air. "You know, my mother always told me, if you corner a rat, you'd better be ready for the bite." The taller one tried to speak, but his words died when I kicked the latch on the floor. In an instant, the old door behind them slammed shut with the force of the counterweight I'd rigged earlier in the day. The chain rattled as it locked into place. "You like talking things that don't belong to you," I continued, stepping forward, my boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Well, I like talking something back, peace. One of them lunged toward me, but the barn's floor betrayed him. The boards gave way exactly where I'd weakened them, sending him into the pit below. Not deep enough to kill, just enough to break his arrogance. The other froze, eyes darting between me and the locked door. His breathing quickened. You can't just... Oh, I can, I said, my voice low but steady. And I will. The next few minutes were a blur of shouts, the sound of my phone dialing the sheriff, and the distant wail of sirens cutting through the night. I stood there the whole time, between them and the way out, until the red and blue lights painted the barn walls. When it was over and they were led away in cuffs, the sheriff gave me a look. Margaret, you've done more for this town than anyone else could. I just shook my head. I did it for my land, for my family, and for the quiet nights we used to have, before people like them forgot what it means to live decent. Later, back in my kitchen, I poured myself a cup of tea. My hands were warm around the mug, but my mind wasn't resting yet. Out beyond the fields, the darkness was still there. Somewhere in it, more eyes watched. More hands plotted. Tonight was a victory, but I knew better than to think it was the end. I walked to the window, looked out into the black stretch of farmland, and caught the faintest glimmer far off, too far to tell if it was just another porch light or something else entirely. I smiled just a little. Let him come, I whispered to the night. This old woman isn't done yet. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew the next storm was already on its way.